This is the audio review of Toxic Inequality, How America's Wealth Gap Destroys Mobility, Deepens the Racial Divide, and Threatens Our Future by Thomas Shapiro. Okay, so in recent years, inequality has increased sharply, with income and wealth gaps growing and more money flowing to the 1%. While this is happening, a new conversation about inequality has emerged in the United States. For example, Occupy Wall Street. But the author points out that the media focuses on income disparities, economic class, and the mega rich, but often fails to see the racial aspects of this wealth and income gap. So wealth inequality in the U.S. is uncommonly high. The richest 1% had 42% of all wealth in 2012 and took home 18% of all income. In 2015, the U.S. had the highest wealth inequality among industrialized nations, according to the Alliance Group, the world's largest financial service company that calculates each country's Gini coefficient, a measure of inequality in which 0 indicates perfect equality and 100 perfect inequality. In 2015, the U.S. had the highest wealth inequality among industrialized nations with a score of 80.56, which is why the USA was dubbed the unequal states of America. Wealth concentration has followed a U-shaped pattern over the last 100 years, with the highest peak in the beginning of the 20th century, which fell after the Great Depression in 1929 through 1978, an era of less inequality, until it started to rise again in 1978 and has been rising ever since. The rise of wealth inequality is almost entirely due to the increase of the top 1%'s wealth share. Steady decline in the bottom 90% of wealth share has struck middle-class families in particular. Half of the population has less than $500 in savings, which means if a financial issue arises, they may not be able to handle it, or they're going to have to incur more debt to try to do so. So wealth is not just a matter of money. Wealth is also about power, status, opportunity, identity, and self-image. Wealth gives advantages and can be transformative. But for those who lack it, they're tremendously disadvantaged. A family's income reflects their educational and occupational achievements, but wealth is needed to solidify these achievements so you can build a solid foundation of economic security. The social explanations for wealth inequality are many, and most focus on victim blaming or a sort of culture of poverty ideology that says that the poor are lazy, unskilled, and uneducated. And some of these explanations also have very racialized understandings or explanations connected to them, such as blaming immigrants for poverty, or those people who are poor and receiving government aid. As I've said before, whenever there's an inequality in society, to obscure it, to leave those with power in charge, we tend to develop these types of ideologies to explain away inequality, to justify the structure as it is. This is dangerous, as people start to believe that those in poverty choose to be there. Then they're obviously not going to support reforms that would help people gain social mobility and transform those communities. So rarely do we discuss the importance of policy and institutional factors on increasing wealth and income inequality in America, right? A lot of the conversation, as he discussed in the reading, is really focused on the high income earners, or in a very race-neutral way, as we'll talk about in a moment. So, the reading argues that we must understand wealth and income inequality together with racial inequality because many explanations are race-neutral, as are the policy recommendations, which fail to recognize the racially disparate distributional impact of universal-sounding solutions. So we boil everyone down to an average. This obscures how much these issues of wealth and income inequality are affecting racial and ethnic minorities more. So it's crucial to understand that the trends towards greater income and wealth inequality are converging with a widening racial wealth gap. While gains have been made since the civil rights movement, the reality is that in recent years, the gap between white and black wealth has widened at an alarming rate, increasing nearly threefold over the last generation. Wealth and income are distributed vastly inequitably along racial and ethnic lines. Policies not only reify current inequality, but also protect existing wealth that originated at times of more racial discrimination. So the chapter also talks about, or the reading also talks about the demographic changes that are happening in the country and how the institutions are ill-prepared to deal with this. But the author is arguing that the demographic changes happening in the country will simply sharpen these divides if we don't act. So the phrase toxic inequality describes a powerful and unprecedented convergence, historic and rising levels of wealth and income inequality in an era of stalled mobility that's intersecting with a widening racial wealth gap, all against the backdrop of changing racial and ethnic demographics. So he calls it toxic inequality because it builds over generations. Wealth and race connect now as they have historically to create an increasingly divided opportunity structure. So as long as wealth and racial inequality are intertwined, we can't achieve equity. Toxic inequality makes challenges harder to tackle, and the author points out how inequality is incompatible with our social ideal of meritocracy, instead leading us down the path of oligarchy. Changing demographics are used to encourage racial division, resentment, and prejudice, which further complicates any sort of economic policy making that's taking place. So it's very important how we respond to this issue, as what we do today echoes through generations to come. Thomas Shapiro points out that earned achievements have become uncoupled from financial rewards and personal well-being. Those promises you get of a life after college, a better life, because of your achievements. But so many, instead of success and financial stability, find instead frustrated ambitions, stalled social mobility, which can again cause more racial inequality as people turn to social narratives blaming poor communities of color and immigrants, instead of taking a hard look at how the systems work to advantage the richest 1%. Right? And as they gain more money, they gain more power and status and access to affect how laws are constructed. Without bold changes, inequality will persist and likely increase. As that happens, again, the rich are going to expand that power more and more. So policy must acknowledge the racial wealth gap and must be bold, transformative, and at a scale to reach the families and communities that are most affected by toxic inequality.